Now we're going to move into a panel that's going to ask the question, why are we here? And I think Nick has given us many of the answers to that, but we're really going to look at what's the condition of our young people today and how can we prepare more of them for success. And so this panel is going to be moderated by a legend here in Arizona, really a national legend for that matter, Carolyn Warner. Carolyn served as Superintendent of Public Instruction for 12 years, and she's done so many other things. She's on the board of Jobs for America's Graduates. She's been a longtime member of the Democratic National Committee. I don't think we're going to be talking about the presidential election today, but she's heavily involved in that. She really is a phenomenal person. Her grandson, believe it or not, was Speaker of the House of the Florida Representatives. And I don't think there's probably anybody in America who can make the same statement, to have their grandson as Speaker of the House of a legislature. So she's going to be moderating an outstanding panel. We have joining us Melanie Anderson, Director of Government Affairs for Opportunity Nation. Your Opportunity Nation is the national organization that focuses on opportunity youth. Then we have Dr. Edward Lee Vargas from AVID. He's Executive Vice President of AVID. He's also the past president, immediate past president of the Association of Latino Administrators and Superintendents. Over here we have Jim Larimore. And Jim is the Chief Officer for Advancement of Underserved Learners at ACT. He's had a very varied career. He was Dean at Dartmouth College. He also worked for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and really understands the issues we're facing today. So with that, I'm going to turn the panel over to Carolyn.
Thank you kindly. Thank you, Bill. I am delighted to see all of you here. We may very well be assembled a group that will change the future of America. And if Snap-on Tools leadership is any example of what the future holds, we perhaps have an opportunity to shape it. Many years ago, I was at a HOSA conference, another one of those grand student organizations, and there was a sign that they had, a huge banner that they had created, and that banner said, "We don't know what the future holds, but we know who holds the future." And those are the young people that we serve, that indeed are the future of America. I think this is a wonderful conference, the second conference of the Pathways Institute, a great turnout, and such significant people that are here, that are committed to this cause. Since you are here, you know why we're here. And that is because we have a problem that we must do our best to solve. The problem is an Arizona problem. It is a southwestern states problem. It is a national problem. It is a problem. Our challenge is what to do about this challenge. And that's why the charge of this first panel of this conference is to set the stage for the rest of the conference by outlining why the American dream is eluding so many of our young people. So, the why of the matter before us will be the topic of our session, and we have expert panelists with significant perspectives on our challenge, and we're ready to go. Each of them will be given a brief overview of the issue as they view it. And we will devote the balance of our time to a conversation between and among our panelists. Time does not allow us, sad to say, for Q&A from the audience, but hopefully you will be so inspired by the quality of the presentations that are made that you will have no further questions. I'd like to begin now with our first panelist, and that will be Jim Larimore of ACT. He's the first presenter. He is the Chief Officer for Advancement of Underserved Learners of ACT. Jim, please come to the platform.
Yeah, no pressure here, right? So I had some remarks that I planned to share with you this morning, but I think what I would like to do instead is really riff off of some of the comments that people have already made this morning. I first, though, want to greet you by saying Maraweka, Kobenwa, and Howdy, and to reflect on the presence in my life of my ancestors from the Comanche Nation from Japan, and also from this little ragged band of Scots-Irish settlers who found their way to Texas many, many years ago. I think about them when I talk in events like this because I realize with a great deal of humility that the opportunities that I've had in my life were opportunities that were denied to my ancestors, that I stand on their shoulders, and that the opportunities that I have to make a difference in the world are really grounded in some of the struggles and the challenges that they faced in their own lifetimes. In addition to having the title that I do at ACT, I'm a recovering dean of students. I've worked in post-secondary education for 30 years. This is the first time in my life that I'm not on a first-name basis, or first year in my working life, I should say, that I'm not on a first-name basis with our local police chief. It's one of the nice things that happens when you stop being a dean of students. I'm a first-generation college grad from a multiracial background. My dad was a career soldier in the U.S. Army, left school in the 7th grade to go to work and help support his family before serving our country in World War II and after. So when I think about the American dream, I think about the dream that my parents pursued, and I think about the kinds of opportunities that they had and opportunities that were denied to them. I think I'll start maybe by giving you the closing observation that I wanted to share, which is that we are at the brink in this country of making a great decision, one decision that will define what life will be like for future generations. And it really is about us, whether we are ready to realize that the prosperity and stability of our society rests in our ability to educate the young people who are with us today. And this is a majority low-income population. If you pay attention to who is attending or who are attending our public schools now, also majority minority or majority student of color population. This is a generation of students who need us, but look quite different than generations that have preceded them. And there are issues with that when we think about equity, when we think about social justice or inequality in our society. And those are issues that I want to bring kind of front and center in our discussion today. But I'll start with a few inconvenient facts. All right, we know that by this time, in less than a decade, about 2/3 of the jobs in this country will require some level of post-secondary education, a 1, 2, or 4-year degree program or higher. We know that we are on track now for about a 3 million credential or degree shortfall in that period of time. So we know that the productivity that we're getting, the completion rates that we're getting out of our educational systems are not on a trajectory to match what our needs will be in the future. We know some things that are kind of painful truths that we need to admit. We know that poor kids who do well academically in school are less likely to graduate from college than rich kids who do much less well in school. We know that our most selective colleges and universities in the country have student bodies that together are made up about 9% of students from the bottom half of the income distribution, and student bodies that are made up about 74, 75% from students who are coming from families in the top income quartile. So there's a tremendous mismatch. And what I would point out to you there is that that also has to do with the subsidies, private or public, that institutions of post-secondary education receive. So that if you are a student who is attending one of the most selective schools in the country, for every dollar that you or your family pay, about $5 of someone else's money is used to support your education. If you're a student who is attending one of the 10% of the less or least well-funded schools in the country, for every dollar that your family pays, you're matched by about 78%. There's 78 cents of other people's investment. So we have a pyramid that really needs to be flipped in terms of public support for institutions that do the heavy lifting of educating the great majority of students in this country. There are issues of equity embedded in all of that. We know that over the last 30 years, that we have shifted in this country to a position where we think of education as more of a private good than a public good. And that's reflected in the way that we think about schools and funding them. We know that we're in a position where costs have been shifted shifted to students and their families, and at the same time that we've allowed institutions to invest scholarship dollars in institutional merit aid rather than need-based aid, which is a part of the subsidy for students who may be most attractive in helping a school move up in the rankings, but is really not a great public policy idea for us in terms of getting more students, more low-income and middle-income kids to the finish line. We know that as our income distributions have changed in the U.S., we also know that this is reflected increasingly in residential segregation patterns. So I just want to ask by a show of hands, how many of you would say, willing to admit publicly this morning, that you grew up during the 1950s, 1960s, or maybe the first half or so of the 1970s? Okay, so if you have a chance to take a look around in the communities where you grew up, maybe the communities where you live now, one of the differences that you'll see was that in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, in the post-World War II kind of boom era of the American economy, that it was much more the norm in those days that students from lower-income families and students from more well-to-do families attended the same schools. They may not have lived in exactly the same neighborhoods, but they lived much closer to each other than is the case today. And if you take that out one more level and think about how we support our public schools rely on local taxes. So in an era where there's income segregation, there are more dollars following wealthier families to support better public schools, and there are less dollars available to support kids who are growing up in poorer neighborhoods. What that means is that we get what we pay for. Higher teacher turnover, less experienced teachers, working with the students who need the best teachers that we can possibly put in front of them. So with that, I'll just share one final data point. I'm not sure how I'm doing on time, but this is a topic that is kind of dear to my heart. When we take a look at what it is that we see today, and we think about the great challenges that face our generation and the generation of students who are our responsibility to educate, one of the things we need to know is that we have been here before. This is, to us, it's new, but if you look back over the course of American history, this is really not something new. In the middle of the last century, from the period of about the 1930s to about 1975, 1980, the U.S. made significant investments in things like the GI Bill, the Pell Grant, opening up access to education, thinking about ways that we would help people move up and that we would help lift people up over that period of time. I've been reading a lot. I'm a sociologist by training, but I've been reading a lot in economics recently. And one of the most interesting pieces of work that I've come across lately is by a guy named Peter Klenow. He's an economist at Stanford University. Peter led a team of University of Chicago and Stanford economists to look at the effect of increasing opportunity for low-income students, for women, for students of color, from about the middle period of the last century to about 2010. And what his team found, was that fully 15 to 20% of the increase in productivity and economic prosperity in the U.S. economy was attributed to the opening up of opportunity to people who had talent, who were willing to work hard, who simply needed an opportunity to get ahead. If you think about what that means in math, it's about a $3.6 trillion contribution on an $18 trillion economy. We have been riding the benefits of those investments through the latter part of the last century, the first 16 years of this century. And the argument that I would make, kind of twisting a little bit some of the earlier comments today, is that as we think about what we need to do to create a stronger middle class, to create pathways to opportunity for students who are coming up today, we also need to think about the public investment that will require and the priority of where those dollars will actually touch ground to help the students who need the help the most. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Jim, going back even further, and I'm so old that I can remember some of these things, is when Franklin Roosevelt created the CCC camps for young people that were not in school and were not employed, and helped them acquire skills that were marketable and that were needed in the marketplace. So clearly, Pell Grants have made a tremendous amount of difference, as has the Perkins funding that helps CTE so significantly and has over these many years. Jim, that was a wonderful presentation. Thank you very much. And now our next presenter is a remarkable woman. Melanie Anderson is with Opportunity Nation. She is the Director of Government Affairs of Opportunity Nation. We are delighted to have you, Melanie. Please take the podium.
Thank you. Good morning. About 350 community organizations, businesses, educational institutions make up the Opportunity Nation Coalition. We also have 200 opportunity leaders. These are young adults that are in their communities, on their college campuses, advocating for increased opportunity. And at our first break, I'm going to be making a beeline for Catherine and begging her to join this group. We'd be thrilled to have her. When we first formed as a campaign 5 years ago, it was really important for us to give communities a sense of what opportunity is, but more importantly, what they can do in their communities to increase it. That's why we created the Opportunity Index. We rank all 50 states plus DC, and we grade about 3,000 counties. There are 16 indicators in the index. There are things like the violent crime rate, gives you a sense of, is it safe to go to work, to go to school? We include preschool enrollment, high school graduation rates, the number of physicians in a community. We also include the rate of youth disconnection, so 16 to 24-year-olds who are not in school and working. I know we all have smartphones and tablets and are completely surrounded by technology. So not right now, but at the next break, I really encourage you to go to the Opportunity Index website. You can play around with it, compare states, compare communities, go back and look at progress over past years, and really get a sense of what opportunity looks like in your communities. This is where it gets a bit wonky, but please stay with me. I really think this is really important to the work that you all are doing. Every indicator is really important. These are big, complex macro numbers. The purpose of the index was to get beyond this idea of one indicator makes the difference. But when you run a correlation to see which factors most impact a community's score, the poverty rate and the rate of youth disconnection have the strongest correlation. That's a wonky statistical thing to say, but I think it's really important in talking to people who don't live and breathe this every day, that these are important numbers. This is to say that a community that has low numbers of disconnected youth or opportunity youth, the more positive frame that I know we all like to use, and I think is finally starting to matter beyond these walls. This is a community that's invested in this population, that has paid attention to this population. I think this is a huge ROI argument to make when you're speaking to boards, when you're speaking to funders, elected officials, unusual suspects that you're trying to get to engage in your work. You can say to them, I have data that says when young adults are doing well, communities are doing well. Before we tackle the opportunity youth number, I just want to take a quick broad look at our 2015 data, and we'll start with the good news first. Overall, since we released the index first in 2011, opportunity broadly has increased 9%. Specifically here in Arizona, you've seen the violent crime rate go down. You've also seen group membership go up, so more people are getting involved in their communities. Now for the bad news. We have high rates of poverty. Income inequality is going up. We mentioned the disconnected youth number. In 2015, there were 5.5 million opportunity youth. That's 1 in 7 young adults. That's about the population of the state of Minnesota. While the rate of disconnection has gone down slightly since we first released the index in 2011, it is still higher than pre-recession levels. To put some of this in context, I wanted to give you some local numbers. In Arizona, there's about 146,000 disconnected youth. Arizona has the 7th highest rate of youth disconnection in the country. Maricopa County has about 78,000. This is about the same as it was last year, slightly higher. And when you look at other states in the Southwest tends to have high rates of youth disconnection. So who are these opportunity youth, and why have they become disconnected from their communities? There's a wide variety of reasons for that. They are teen parents. They have been in and out of the juvenile justice system. Some of them are foster youth who have aged out of the system and don't have any support. They are disproportionately male. About 30 to 40% lack high school diplomas. And 3 out of 5 say that they grew up in a poor household. But at the same time, I think it's really important to say that opportunity youth are optimistic. 72% of them say that they plan on achieving their life goals. They're also motivated. 67% say they want some type of post-secondary degree or credential. And they're responsible. 77% say that they believe it's their responsibility to achieve their education and career goals. As I mentioned, as a campaign, we think data is really important. It helps inform all the work you're doing. We've spent the last couple of years analyzing the index data and putting out resources that are available to all of you on our website. 2 years ago, we released a civic engagement report that looked at if you increase civic engagement in a community, what positive outcomes it will have on the opportunity youth population. And later this year, we're going to be releasing a retail and opportunity report, which is funded by Walmart, that is really going to look at the retail industry and see how it impacts opportunity in a community. I know we're not going to have time for questions on this session, but I'm really looking forward to the dialogue we're going to have for the next 2 days. Thank you.
I think it's significant that Melanie's association, Opportunity Nation, was created in large measure because of the problem. And we are here because there is a problem. So we are on exactly the same page. I was pleased to know and to have an opportunity to participate in a conference sponsored by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. It is exciting to know that the U.S. Chamber and USA Funds are beginning to understand what the opportunities are for opportunity youth. And I think that is very promising and excellent opportunity for us to take advantage of as a nation. Thank you so much, Melanie. Our next speaker is William Mendoza, who is the White House Initiative on American Indian and Alaska Native Education. I am pleased to present Bill William, the executive director of this initiative. We will find out ahead of time that Bill knows his way around not just the White House and the Oval Office, but a large segment of Washington, D.C. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you William Mendoza.
I think I'd too echo the governor's advice to Catherine to just stay away for a little bit and then let things simmer down and then maybe jump back into public service. So Washington, D.C. is a challenging place, but an essential one for us to begin navigating these important conversations which have historically not fully impacted tribal communities around the country. And whether we are talking about the dispersed experience in places like Phoenix as an urban Indian center, or the far reaches of rural country, frontier even, in other places on our American Indian and Alaska Native reservations around the country. The challenges for tribal communities in structuring in these pathways, I tend, coming from the great state of South Dakota and that region, not try to put things into pipeline terms. That's a little bit inappropriate for our area of the country at this moment, and I think for Indian country as a whole. And so I very much prescribe to the idea of pathways, seemingly appropriate for the areas of the country that we all inhabit. And in that sense, listening to our previous speakers this morning, Indian country can certainly empathize with the stigma around CTE. When you ask parents, at least conceptually, the importance behind CTE, you get a different response when you place this in their lap as to the future of their own children. and what this means for their pathways and their added value to the communities, and where this might take their children or where it might not take their children, and especially how it builds community and supports the kinds of ways of knowing and being and ideals that make us who we are in our unique contexts. Indian country can certainly relate with that. And in fact, we take it a little bit further from stigma to trauma, when education has been utilized to be not only a tool of forceful assimilation, but acculturation, but quite literally an aspect of our all but demise, and yet we are still here. And we are still trying to utilize the mobility of education as a tool to not only infuse within it our identity and our communities, but also add value in the empathetic sense that we agree with much of what we are trying to pursue as a nation, as humanity. And in that sense, what is missing from the conversation within CTE is exactly who is among you right now, our tribal people, the voices of tribal people, and what they would like to have be affected within their communities, and how that relates to the kind of innovation that we are all aspiring to, particularly as, and I kind of get a little bit annoyed, and I know the speakers are well-intentioned when they talk about this diverse reality that we currently find ourselves in. America, you've always been diverse. You're just now recognizing it. Indian country has lived for millennia with over 567 tribes and over 300 different languages, and you are privy to over 22 of these, at least formally recognized by the government, and have relationships with our government and your great state. But those challenges for those communities have typically been, they need to be at the table. They need to be, not only that relationship being established historically has been lacking, but we need it now. How many of you have met, by show of hands, with the Intertribal Council of Arizona, which represents the vast majority of tribes in this state? Please raise your hand. Not enough. And whether you are visiting this state in show of partnership, you too have regional tribal associations that have linkages to this state and beyond. And these are essential organizations that not only operate programming. I believe ICTA operates about 70 different programmings, ranging in a whole vast array of sectors, definitely relevant. And the experiment that is happening right now, if not the prescribed trajectory that we all need to be moving in, is self-determination. We all agree with that when we think about local control. We certainly agree about that when we think of producing fine young people like Catherine here from our communities. And listening to Catherine, not to take away from her struggle, it's all relative. It's all a matter of perspective. What I heard from Catherine speaking is that she had opportunities placed in front of her, and she had a support system that was there, a system that was not only relevant to her, but pushed her beyond her own aspirations to think of things that she might not have otherwise considered. But the realities of our school systems today, the vast majority of school systems, 93%, serve American Indian and Alaska Native students, by where these tribal leaders who are absent from those conversations need to be brought in and be able to contribute. They not only have resources, but they have plans. I talk to tribal leaders across the country, and especially here in Arizona, that says we have plans for days. We need partners. We need folks willing to address our communities with us and bring them up from a status of destruction to the reconstruction phase that they are in now in terms of rebuilding their tribal nations. And it is strong, and it's not just about gaming either. 10% of the 567 tribes in this country and the $29 billion gaming industry, those revenues go to less than 10% of the tribes in this country. So to make this just about gaming is a misnomer. There are other vibrant potential sectors. Why we can't look at American Indian Alaska Native unemployment, whether it's 60%, whether it's 80%, even if it's 30%, that is an opportunity for us. That is a pathway that we need to be pursuing and connecting, because it's in our own backyard. And so whether we are talking about building engines or delivering more effective healthcare that's representative of our communities, I share with you this, that especially coming from areas like South Dakota and Montana, cowboys have a lot more in common with Indians than you might think. When they go to Washington, D.C., we're all flyover states, and our plight, our shared opportunities are one and the same. And so we've been able to unravel much of, or at least take new steps, not unravel, but I guess we are unraveling that history here through Pathways by meeting. Yesterday we had a wonderful pre-session with tribal leaders to talk not only about the foundation of education and how we've been able to, over the course of 40 years together, by relinquishing some authorities and collaborating in other spaces, working side by side with tribes to invest in education differently than we had prescribed and driven before, to really involve them. Our graduation rates this year, unfortunately, and I always qualify this, parallel to some of the most challenging standards-based reform efforts in the country for all populations, have flatlined. Our graduation rates have flatlined. Others have cited those statistics. And I'll close with this point. But over the past 40 years, we have doubled high school graduation rates. We have doubled college going rates. We have doubled college completion rates. I don't know very many other ethnicities or races or subcategories that can say that. Self-determination involving tribes through self-governance is working. And that is the one principle that I'd like to leave you with here today, and what we are trying to infuse into all of the great presenters' information as to making sure that you are reaching out to your tribes, helping to build that capacity, and it starts with relationship building. So much of our work at the federal government level has centered on that place-based work that is beneficial to surrounding communities. We see tribes taking these steps time and time again, and in the scope of education, this is the foundational part of what the laws, whether we're talking about the impending Carl Perkins, which is going to be infused if the White House initiative has anything to do it by way of tribal leaders, to ensure that you all are called upon to partner with tribes, just as we've been able to achieve in the Every Student Succeeds Act, by where our state educational agencies was able to visit with Superintendent Douglas about what that future holds and how we need to do more and build upon her successes and the successes of Arizona, and how local education agencies, our school districts, are forced to think about the issue of how to collaborate and coordinate with tribes in more effective ways. And so these are the realities and our future simultaneously. And so appreciate you hearing us out, and please reach out to the tribal people who are within your communities and ask yourselves, within the scope of your framework, within the scope of your programming, how are your American Indian and Alaska Native students being impacted within that? If they are not spoken for, if you are not valuing their uniquenesses, then that is going to continue to be a challenge of your missed opportunities within these vital communities that are essential to the success of Arizona and our surrounding states. Thank you.
Bill, I want to tell you a story. There is a man in Arizona whose name is Clyde McBride. Clyde McBride is a CTE teacher at Monument Valley High School. And one day, a fellow named Joe Klein, who was a writer for Newsweek magazine, challenged me on the fact that CTE was a waste of time and a waste of money. So I asked him if he would come to Arizona, and he said, yes, I will. And I said, please wear your tennis shoes. He came to Arizona, and we took him around to the various CTE centers and JTEDs, and then we flew him up to Monument Valley High School. This is in the middle of the Navajo Nation. Clyde McBride, last year, was elected as the CTE Teacher of the Year. And so Joe Klein was unprepared, and that is an understatement for what he found. Here were all of these students in a veterinarian program doing suturing and preparing all of the equipment to deal with injured animals, sheep, dogs, horses, cows, bulls, all of this, big animals. And these young people were spectacular. And the most impressive thing, I think, was the fact that one of these students leaned over Joe Klein and said, "Mr. Klein, I'm so sorry, but that is not the way you suture." And Joe said, "Well, what is the way?" Now, they were using green bananas as the closest thing to human flesh and suturing. And so this young man showed Joe Klein how to properly suture a wound. It was the most amazing thing. And he stood up and he says, "I don't think I'll ever have occasion to use this, but I'm awfully glad to know it." So the reality is that in the middle of the Navajo Nation, with all of these students, in this particular school is 95% Native, that most all of these students of Clyde McBride received scholarships to go on to college and university or to community college. Most of these students are the most incredibly, remarkably outstanding, in-your-face people you'll ever want to meet. They walk up to you, they tell you their name, they look you in the eye, they shake your hand, and they say, "What can I do for you?" The Arizona Tribal Council, Intertribal Council, is comprised of 22 Native tribes and bands as well that are not yet recognized. They do a remarkable job. We involved them in the Joe Klein Newsweek magazine visit to Arizona, and at the end of that, there was a double spread center pages, the two center pages of Time magazine of these youngsters dealing with these large animals, shoeing horses, and fulfilling the requirements of the needs on that particular reservation, and then going on to veterinarian school and being incredibly successful. So, enough of Arizona and our 22 tribes and bands, and enough about Clyde McBride, who is nonetheless an icon here in Arizona. Our next speaker is a most distinguished gentleman. He is our fourth panelist. It's Edward Lee Vargas. He is Executive Vice President of the AVID Center, AVID Center, past president of the Association of Latino Administrators and Superintendents in the United States of America. Gives me great pleasure to present to you Edward Vargas.
Thank you, and I want to thank everyone as well for being here today. Obviously, you're here because you care. And I think the title of this conference, Global Pathways Institute, reflects not only the global nature of the world that we live in, pathways being the choices that our kids can have in their lives so that they have this kind of choices that you've had in yours because all of you have been successful. And then Institute because it's about learning and learning together. When Jim got up, he mentioned he was a recovering dean. I'm actually a recovering superintendent. I was a superintendent of schools in 5 different times, 4 different states, all large urban districts. And one of the things that was, I think, really underscored what we're talking about today was particularly when I was in LA County in Hacienda La Puente. We ran not only our K-12 system, but we ran the largest, second largest adult ed education system in the state of California, educating about 33,000 students that allowed them to complete AA degrees, get industry certificates. We also ran the largest correctional ed system in the country. We served all the jails in LA County, over 200,000 prisoners, where we don't want our kids to go. And I say that because that experience and my experience in Kent, Washington, most recently before joining AVID, which is the 4th largest industrial center in the United States. It has the Center for Advanced Manufacturing as a superintendent having a business advisory council. And keep in mind, Kent is the home to Amazon, Starbucks, REI, Google, Boeing, Microsoft. What they always reminded me is that there's this false dichotomy that you're either going to go to some industry or that you're going to go to college. And the false dichotomy nature of it is what I keep hearing and we're learning is that the rigor and the challenges in the evolving economy in this world requires all students to have a rigorous education. I remember the executive for Red Dot in Kent, and that Red Dot provides all the air conditioning to military vehicles all around the world. He would always tell me, Lee, I need kids that have the same college preparation that everyone else does because they need to be critical thinkers, they need to read extremely well, they need to work in teams, they need to speak other languages. So I share all that because I think really what we forget about is the purpose of public education. When you think about the founding fathers and mothers in public education, the common school movement, there were clearly two purposes in mind. One was to educate a nation of immigrants so that we could have a civic literate society that could participate in this experiment we were calling a democracy. The second reason was so that they could compete in an economy so we could have a way of life unlike anywhere else in the world. And we heard several references to that. And when you think about the data, and I'm not going to go over the data, but it's alarming that we have graduation rates for Latinos and for African Americans, for Native Americans, for Asian Pacific Islanders, sometimes as low as the 50s in some states, and dropout rates alarmingly high. And you think about the college readiness gap. In 2014, the National Student Clearinghouse surveyed students to determine the percentages that were meeting college entrance requirements, having had a rigorous education. And what was alarming about that is that not depended on every state's college requirements, entrance requirements. When you look at that data and you look at that overall only 36% of the population had that kind of a preparation. For Latinos, it was 22%. For African Americans, it was 29%. And it goes on and on. And then you look at programs like AVID, which is why I joined them, and all of those gaps are gone. It's in the 95%. But I say that because we know what to do to make a difference so that kids have their choices. And when you think about the purpose of public education, it's even more true today about why we need to educate all kids to high standards. And I want to underscore this global piece because you have to remember that there's only 313 million people in the U.S. There are 7.2 billion people on the planet. In a hyper-connected world, as a superintendent, I would tell our kids, you're not going to be competing with just kids from Dade County, Florida, or LA Unified, or Phoenix, Arizona. You're going to be competing with kids from all over the world. When you think about China has more honors kids than we even have kids. So preparing our kids for their future, not our past and certainly not our present, we have a moral responsibility to remember our purpose. And when you think about 1930s, our graduation rate in America was 36%. And we didn't have a dropout problem. Because if you had a strong back and a strong work ethic, you could achieve the American dream. But as the industrial economy disappears before our eyes and we inherit a globally connected, hyper-connected world with already over 2 billion of those folks linked to the internet, that's the reality of why we need to educate all of our kids in order to preserve our American democracy. So it's a moral commitment that we have to make. I really believe that because I really believe that education is the most important thing that you and I will ever do in our lives. So thank you again for making that happen in your communities everywhere. Thank you.
We're running a little short on time, so we're not actually going to have time for a conversation between and among our panelists. We are going to draw it to a close because I just got the hook right down here that says you're through. So let me close in this way. I want to thank all of our panelists. Aren't they marvelous, and didn't they do a great job? Thank you. As the chairman of the Arizona Quality Skills Commission, it is my honor to work with great people like these folk and the business and industry sector, as well as foundations and education and civic leaders who work to promote and advance pathways to economic success for America's young people, and most particularly in this case, Arizona's young people. They are dedicated to community colleges, to JTEDs, our Joint Technical Education Districts, and to all of the areas of secondary and post-secondary education. Our job of the Quality Skills Commission is to build the standards against which our students will be measured in their final assessment as they leave the career and technical education programs at their schools. Catherine is a classic example how fabulous she is, and is president of Skills USA. I think that she has done a remarkable job and serves as a great example for all of us. So finally, this is such a worthwhile endeavor that you have committed yourselves to. It's only through a team effort, and I thank you for being part of this. I will close with the words of Thomas Jefferson, because I think he said it best. He said, "There are extraordinary capabilities in ordinary people, given the opportunity. You here are the ones that provide the opportunity." God bless. Thank you very much.